Hello everyone, my name is George Farmer and I'm here today at Aquarium Gardens for part 2 of our hardscaping video series, and this is all about how to use hardscape. Thanks so much for the people that have given feedback already on our YouTube channel and also Facebook. It's really appreciated. From that feedback we've decided to actually do a 4-part series on hardscape because it is a really important part of the aquascaping process. The first thing I'm going to talk about is how to use rocks, or basically how not to use rocks. Now hopefully you can see behind me we've got one stone in there, and this is what not to do. So a few things wrong with this hardscape. It's boring, it's round, it's not got any features really, it's positioned centrally and it's not big enough. So all those things added together make a not very impressive hardscape layout. We need bigger hardscape, we need bigger rocks, we need to position it off centre by around about 1/3 ideally, and we need more of them as well. So hopefully you can see that this is definitely not a good piece of hardscaping. Okay, so before I start, just a quick disclaimer. The way I'm going to show you how I do things, it is exactly that, the way I do things. It doesn't mean that it's the right way. Aquascaping is all about having fun and enjoying it for yourself. So by all means watch the video, take a few lessons on board, hopefully you can use them yourselves, but don't take my way as the only way to do things. So I'm going to talk about Iwagumi. Now Iwagumi is the Japanese word for rock garden. So I'm going to show you guys how to create a sans-on Iwagumi. Sans-on Iwagumi is a 3-stone layout. It's the simplest form of Iwagumi, and we tend to only use odd numbers when we're using rocks in aquascaping. So 3 stones is a good place to start. I'm going to talk about how we choose our rocks and how to position them and how to lay them out in the actual aquarium itself, hopefully to create the best effect possible. I'm doing it in quite strict time limits. I'd normally take a lot longer doing this if I was at home, but for video purposes I'm going to kind of not rush through but hopefully get it done quite quickly so you don't get too bored. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is choose our main stone. Now I'm very lucky in Aquarium Gardens here to have access to some beautiful stones, including this giant 25 kilo piece of mini landscape rock or Sirius stone. So when we're working, I'm going to use a smaller piece just to give you some examples of how I choose the stones. So when you're in your shop, when you're in your retailer and you're looking at the rocks, just look at them for character. So when I mean character, I mean look at the lines, look at the gouges that have been taken out. Is it interesting? Does it hold your interest? Think about the different angles that it could be placed. Look at it from all sides, rotate it around on all axes. So for instance, if I looked at that there, that's quite flat, that's quite boring, doesn't look particularly natural. However, if I rotate it 180 degrees, it's a lot more interesting. So you see the lines there. It's a lot, you've got different colours, different textures on there. So that's quite a nice smaller rock. First rock we want to choose is our main, what we call our main stone, or the master stone. Now this is the biggest rock in the shop, so I thought I'd use it. We're not planting this is just a dry kind of play sand area, if you like, to experiment with our hardscaping. So I'm actually going to dominate this area with the stone just to give you an idea of what we do. So I've already looked at this at all angles, so I'm not going to do it again now because it's so heavy. But this is definitely the most interesting side, and this is the highest piece here. So what I'm going to do is just position it off centre. So we already talked about earlier in the video why it's a good idea not to put things centrally. Basically your eye is constantly darting left to right and it can't settle, which is why we like to position focal points just off centre. You might have heard of the rule of thirds or the golden ratio, and that's a really good way to position your focal points. Okay, so we've got our main stone in here. This is the focal point without a doubt. It's obviously dominating the area, and I'm just looking at it and thinking, how can I make that look any better? At the moment it's quite perpendicular, it's sitting up quite straight, so I could tilt it towards me perhaps, make it look a bit more interesting. We can rotate it in the sand and we can just have a good old play with it. And this is the great thing about working in a dry area. You can take as long as you like. You're not making a mess, and you can just keep playing around until you're absolutely content with your layout. So I'm happy with that for now. That's the main stone in place. Now we're going to choose our next stone, which will be the next smallest size down. So when we're choosing our rocks in the shop, just have a look at them all, see what's the most interesting, see what's got the most interesting character, the textures, the colours, and do they suit the master stone as well. A really bad choice would be to use a completely different rock in here. Dave, do you want to just pass me a bit of dragonstone? That is totally different, and if we put that there, you know, that's a perfect example of not what to do. Okay, and you'd be surprised at how many aquascapes I see with 2 or 3 different types of rock, and it generally looks unnatural unless you really know what you're doing. So I'm looking at the stone, I'm looking at all angles, all axes, which side's the most interesting, which side actually suits what we can see there. So actually, I'm looking at this and it's actually quite different textures. It's got lots of pits in it, it's got lots of different sort of contrasts with white and grey, and actually it's not really in keeping with this stone, so I'm going to change this for another one. Okay, this is a lot better, this is a lot more similar to this main stone here. It's got a similar texture, it's got similar kind of gouges and a similar coloration. So yeah, that's definitely the one to choose. Again, rotate it all angles, all axes. Now I'm looking at that and you can hopefully see that that's really odd. It looks really boring, it's flat, and it's really pale compared to this one. So we definitely don't want to be seeing that. So that needs to either face away from us or be in the substrate so we can't see it. Now it's really important to consider this, what we call the strata of the stone. Now strata is like the natural line that's running through the stone. So you can see here, there's some definite lines running down there, and down there, and down there. So that's the strata there. And the strata on this rock is flowing this way. And what I personally like to do with sands on Iwagumi is hopefully having all the strata all lining up to the same kind of point, if you like. So we follow the strata here, it comes up to around here, and then if we want to use a strata for the other rock, we'll probably have the strata pointing in this way, so it intersects around here. So bearing that in mind, and there you can see the strata there, and they kind of intersect quite nicely. There's quite a nice gap there. This angle here almost mimics this angle here, so actually that works out quite nicely as well. Okay, so I've just reviewed the footage back on the video, and that's a really valuable thing to do actually. That's a good tip for you. If you want to get your Iwagumi right, then do take photos as you're doing it. It's actually quite interesting viewing it in 2 dimensions rather than 3 dimensions. You get a much kind of better sense of balance, if you like. And I noticed that the stone was far too far over to the right, and it just looked a bit flat and boring. So what I've done is moved it over to the left. I've actually laid it towards the front, twisted it towards me, and twisted it around, and it's made it look a lot more interesting and a lot more balanced, I think. So we're ready to move on to our third stone. You know, if you've got a good shop, hopefully they'll have a really good selection of stones. Hopefully they'll have an area like this to play with, if you're lucky. And with Hardscape, like I said in the first part of the video series, if you can hoard it, then do. You know, it's always better to have too much to choose from than not enough. So I do recommend every time you go to an aquatic retailer, check out the Hardscape selection and buy something. Even if I just buy 1 stone on a shop visit, then that's good for me. I'll just keep an eye out for any nice stones. So. Okay, again I'm looking at the stone, I'm comparing it to what I've got already. Does it suit it? That one doesn't, it's too pale, and the shape's all wrong. So we'll get rid of that. This one is definitely a lot more similar. It's quite interesting. That side's probably the most boring. That's a bit more interesting, and it kind of suits this one here especially. So thinking about the strata again, and I think that line there matches that line there, lines up with that one there quite nicely. So I think if we just pop that there like so, and that is our sands on Iwagumi complete. Okay guys, that's it for part 2 of the hardscaping series. I've used mini landscape rock, which retails for £3.49 per kilo at Aquarium Gardens. Just to let you know, this rock alone is it's obviously an extra large piece, which weighs around about 25 kilos. This probably weighs about 1 kilo, and this probably about 3 kilos. So you could do the maths. Might seem expensive, but definitely worth investing in good hardscape if you want to create an effective aquascape. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you have, please subscribe and keep on scaping. Cheers. Bye bye.